Hello and welcome to You Talking to Me, the Euranet Plus debate. Today, Donald Trump has been elected the new president of the United States. His positions during his campaign implied a new global order, instability, and major consequences for the relations between the European Union and the United States, especially when it comes to trade and defense. In order to discuss about the consequences of this election, let me first introduce our guest today. I'm here with David McAllister. He's a German member of the European Parliament for the European People's Party, and he's also chair of the delegation for relations with the United States. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
And we have also here Mr. Philippe Lamberts. He's a Belgian member of the European Parliament also for the Green Party, and he's co-chair of this party. Welcome. Thanks for being here also. So we woke up all, I guess, with the news, a bit of a surprise of the victory of Donald Trump. I would like to know what was your first reaction when you check, I guess, with your mobile phone and you learn about the news?
Well, I was actually more or less up all night, and I went to the reception at the US ambassador's place. The outcome of the election certainly wasn't what we were all expecting, but this is how democracy works, and a majority of the American people have decided that Mr. Trump should be their next president, and we have to respect the decision of the American people, even though most of us were probably in favor of Mrs. Clinton becoming the next president.
Are you worried?
Well, I am concerned about the rhetoric of Mr. Trump in the election campaign, and we will now have to wait and see if there's a difference between a President Trump and an election campaigner Trump. During the election campaign, I observed a very aggressive campaign by the Republican candidate, and certainly the American society is deeply divided, and it will be a major task for the new president to try and reunite and reconcile the American nation. And this isn't an easy challenge because Mr. Trump was a very aggressive campaigner and said a lot of things which I understand upset a number of Americans.
Mm-hmm. Are you worried, Mr. Lamberts?
Yes, well, there's a lot of reason to be worried. Insurrectional politics has already scored a major point with the Brexit referendum in the UK, and that's another one. But I see similarities between the two, basically. An insurrection against being lectured and told by the establishment what to do, what not to do. Policies that are leaving behind an increasing part of the population. Don't forget that in the US we are witnessing the deepest inequalities of the developed world. Don't be surprised that at some point those who are left behind or see themselves as threatened to be left behind are insurrecting against the system. Now, of course, the point is not whether Trump was a genuine or a legitimate recipient of the insurrectional votes, because he's been profiting from the system for decades. He's claiming that he's proud now to pay his taxes and all the rest of it. But the fact is that Clinton embodied the establishment, embodied. Well, when you give speeches at $300 a piece, I mean, you are part of the establishment. When you are profiting from the system, when you are seen to be someone having some problems with truth, you know? How can you be credible when you used to defend free trade deals and then you oppose them? I mean, he was the perfect opponent for Trump. He wanted to oppose the establishment, and yet opposing him, the perfect candidate representing the establishment. That said, I may be more worried than you are, because it's not just candidate Trump. The candidate Trump has reflected pretty well what Trump has been all his life. So there was no discrepancy between the words he used, the stances that he took during the campaign, and who he has been all along. So do we have to expect a miracle and a guy changing? Well, I remain to be convinced. Of course, he will need to deal with a Republican majority, both in House and Senate, that are not exactly on his lines. So if he wants to carry a number of his policy points, well, he will need to find a majority, so it won't be a piece of cake. Yet I'm worried because, again, when you think of security, when you say, well, I'm not sure whether the guarantee that NATO gives is rock solid, well, that sends a signal.
In Europe, we are facing similar movements, especially in some countries where far-right movements and populist movements are gaining more and more support and attention. Is there a lesson the European Union should learn out of this victory?
What happened in the United States on Tuesday is something which could also happen in some of the EU member states. I also see parallels to the British EU referendum on the 23rd of June. Obviously, we are entering a new phase of modern democracy. I would call it post-factual democracy, post-factual society. Until now, we did politics the way that we all agreed on the same sheet of facts, and when we had different interpretation of the facts. But now we obviously see people campaigning, telling, obviously not the truth, to actually telling people lies, but obviously
getting away with it.
You can get away with it, and a lot of people are actually believing this lies. This is a serious challenge for all democratic politicians. It's a serious challenge for the media. It's a serious challenge for the whole society. So yes, there are some member states in the European Union where I'm observing similar developments, but to be fair, not in all member states of the European Union. But we see this phenomenon in France, we see it in the Netherlands, we're seeing it in Austria, just to name three.
It seems he has paved the way of a new way of doing politics when everything is okay. He has crossed some red lines that so far until now we didn't cross.
Yeah, indeed. The language that he's been using against either individuals such as Clinton, but many others. He's attacked people supporting Clinton. Remember this mother and father of a dead soldier. He basically insulted them and got away with it. He's aggressing the gays, the Muslims. Basically he defends the white man. But we are witnessing that as well in Europe. Not long ago, Commissioner Oettinger used words that you wouldn't expect to hear from a commissioner. You've heard now former President Sarkozy using language that actually is to the right of Marine Le Pen. So, I mean, indeed, a number of barriers are falling away. And to me, the example must come from above. I mean, I would like that all politicians stick to at least a basic set of common values, starting with Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that says that all human beings, all, black, white, gay, straight, whatever, Muslim, Christian, are born free, equals in rights and in dignity. And I mean, it's for the politicians to show that they adhere to these values. And you see that actually the adhesion to these values is receding in the political landscape, and this is really worrying.
Mr. Lamberts mentioned before something about establishment. So I would like to know, Trump has declared himself to represent the anti-establishment. You can agree or disagree, but this is what he claimed for. And so people have voted for this anti-establishment, meaning that they are not happy with the status quo, they are not happy with what we have. So does something need to change?
First of all, let's be fair that Commissioner Oettinger apologized for his remarks, and I wouldn't like to. I wouldn't. Yes, but I wouldn't like to have his name mentioned in the same category as others. Yes, this presidential election in the United States was obviously an anti-establishment vote. Donald Trump was attacking the political elite from Washington non-stop, and as Mr. Lambert said, Hillary Clinton, from his point of view, was an ideal candidate because she was exactly representing the political elite. But, you know, if you bash the political elite, you are also bashing politicians who are taking their job very seriously. Yeah, exactly. And in a democracy, you need people who go out and vote people, but you also need people who are willing to run for public office. And, you know, if you name politicians from other political parties as criminals and people who are just waiting to betray the people, this is dangerous talk. And we have seen countries where democracy failed because there was this anti-democratic movement which was established. And it all starts with language.
Yeah.
And that's why we have to stand up against this aggressive language.
I would like to introduce in this debate some of our Euranet members, partners. So I would like to please welcome the question coming from Polski Radio, from our colleague Joachim Cicierski.
Good evening from Warsaw. Trump's campaign has, frankly, terrified Europeans when it comes to the things which matter most: the stability of NATO and Trump's thinly veiled admiration for Vladimir Putin. In analyzing Trump's threats to pull out of NATO, how worried should Europe be after the elections?
I thought that Donald Trump's comments on foreign policy were the most worrying from a European point of view. I mean, foreign policy didn't play a major role in the Trump campaign, and Europe didn't too. But when Mr. Trump spoke about foreign policy, I was always very surprised, because he is violating fundamental principles and fundamental values of US foreign policy. We strongly believe in a transatlantic partnership when it comes to security. NATO is one of the fundamental pillars of global security and stability, and his talk about, arguing if Article 5 of the NATO treaty could still be triggered or not, that is worrying. And I do hope that Mr. Trump will now appoint experienced diplomats as Foreign Secretary, as Defense Secretary, and hopefully also listen to the expertise, because we need a strong cooperation between North America and Europe.
As our colleague was saying, he has threatened to leave NATO if countries like the European Union don't pay more money. Would that mean like a reinforcement of the military capacity of the European Union?
Well, quite obviously, there's no free lunch. And if we want security, we need to be able to do what is needed to invest in our military tool. Now, I think that we are wasting a lot of money. We are not getting the bang for our buck in Europe. So there's a lot Europeans need to do in order to take their fair share of their own security, after all. But what is really worrying is indeed putting in doubt the credibility of the security guarantees that we are giving to one another. And one factor of stability is the credibility of the promises that you make. And when you are undermining it, basically you are sending a signal to the likes of Vladimir Putin and others that, this alliance is not serious. And therefore, you are actually having an effect already. So words carry an effect. And this is really, to me, an example of reckless behavior from someone who has behaved recklessly all along his life.
I agree, and I expect that under President Trump, we Europeans will be asked to do more for our own defense and security, and we ought to do more. I strongly believe in closer European cooperation when it comes to defense and security. France and Germany have presented concrete proposals what we can do better, because in the European Union we have 28 member states which have 28 armies. We can do much better if we pool and share our military capacities. So I strongly believe in more European defence cooperation, but please, under the framework of NATO, together with the Americans and Canadians.
To do more, does it mean more money to the NATO? Does it mean a EU army?
Well, all NATO member states have promised to spend 2% of their national budgets on defence. Some have still got a long way to go. But I'm also talking about using the possibilities of the Lisbon Treaty. Why don't we have a permanent structured cooperation on military affairs? Why don't we have a joint headquarter for our joint EU military missions? And why don't we make use of EU battle groups? For instance, the next time the Europeans decide to go to Mali, I think it would be better that we send EU battle groups in the first case, and they would then have to be coordinated by a joint European headquarters. I understand that not all member states of the European Union want to go this way, but Germany, France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, Italy, hopefully some Eastern European partners, they are ready to go this way, and we will have to, because the Americans will expect this from us.
In fact, you mentioned Eastern European countries. They are probably the most worried with the situation, especially concerning the question marks that we have now concerning the relationship between the US and Russia. Should they be worried?
Yeah, I would be worried, and I am worried, actually, because these are fellow EU countries. And so, indeed, the signal that Trump has been sending throughout his campaign and are all signals that seem to indicate that he wants to be a good friend of Vladimir Putin, and we know how little respect the same Putin has for all liberal democracies, for the integrity of the territorial integrity of Russia's neighbors. So again, this is reckless behavior, and there's all reason to be worried.
I would like to include the last question coming from our colleague working for the German radio AMS. Let's listen, please, to Claudia Nopke, she's on the line.
We heard a lot about fear and concerns and dangerous talks and so on. And I would like to know, what is the dangerous meaning behind all that? I mean, today the message of the winning Donald Trump was responded by a kind of shock and fear. And how much do we have to fear when it's about our business connections, for example, with the States? Do we have to be afraid of all the good jobs we have over here linked to the connections with the States? So how much fear about a lot of things is reasonable over here?
Our colleague mentioned the business trade. Many think his victory could imply a threat for the EU-US trade relationships.
Well, we are doing business to the tune of 2 billion a day between the US and the European Union. Now, is that business at risk? I don't know yet. It's too early to say. Is this TTIP project of a transatlantic trade and investment partnership at risk? Quite obviously, and well, that's probably the only good thing that I see in the election of Trump, because that is not a project that we need now. It's not that we don't need the business with the US. It's there. Is it at risk? Quite obviously, if we see an increasingly protectionist US administration, I guess that the risks of a trade war are there.
The United States and the European Union are respectively the most important trade partners, and I do hope that we can continue our good trade relation, because it's beneficial for people on both sides of the Atlantic and for our national economies. The trade deal with the Americans hasn't been easy in the last 2 years, and certainly with the new Trump administration, things won't get easier. They will get more difficult. I still believe that a trade agreement with the Americans would be a good thing for the European Union to promote growth and jobs, but we need a good deal and not a quick deal, and we certainly need a deal which protects our European interests and values. So we've just got to wait and see what the new Trump agenda will be, who he will appoint as trade representative, and then we will know more in the next few years. But Mr. Trump's rhetoric during the election campaign was very protectionist, and I don't understand how on the one hand he's talking about making the American economy protectionist, and on the other hand promising the American citizens jobs and growth. I don't know how that fits together.
What he says is that trade deals, he said trade deals for sucking jobs. That's why he's against these trade deals.
Yes, well, he is criticizing the North American free trade agreement with Canada and Mexico. He wants to reverse that. I would like to know how is that going to work, actually. And he was very critical of the Trans-Pacific trade agreement. He didn't talk so much about TTIP. Yes, but in general, yes, Mr. Trump doesn't believe in free trade. But he will have to answer the question, how can we agree on standards in a globalized economy of the 21st century? If we're not doing it, others will be doing it, especially the Chinese.
But is TTIP kind of dead?
Well, I don't know if TTIP is dead. We'll have to wait and see what happens with the next Trump administration. But the negotiations haven't been easier, and they're going to get even more difficult now.
Okay, so I'm afraid we are running out of time. Thanks so much for being here in this busy day for both of you. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next week.